Hey, everybody. Hey, everyone. Sorry, we're a minute or two behind. Welcome to the SPSM Chat 2.0 reboot. Um, Welcome to you all. We've
Vic.
got some work going on the other side because Victor is trying to get
Oh,
on,
okay.
and right now he's going
Well,
to.
let's see what's happening.
All right, so that everybody hang in there. This has really been a challenge the last couple of weeks. But hey, the good news is I have a new computer, and so hopefully we
Ding,
won't
ding,
have
ding.
any. Yeah, hopefully we will not have any shutdowns tonight. So we have a very interesting conversation. Our guests are going to be Judge Ginger Lerner-Wren, who is back for the second time with us this year, and
It's
we're
an
already talking
encore
about a third
performance.
time. Yep,
Yay.
encore performance. Tracy, say hello.
Hello. Say hello, Tracy.
Cute.
Hi,
And
everybody. I'm Tracy Medeiros, suicide attempt survivor. Very glad to be back now that I'm feeling good. Being more active, hopefully. Although the summer is coming, so motorcycle riding I may be doing. So, see.
of course you might. Victor, you're on speakerphone. Say hello. Did we lose him?
Hello. Hi, Vic. Can you say hello?
Hi.
Can you hear him?
Yeah, I can. It's low, but barely.
Okay.
All right, so I'm just going to touch on a couple of things, and Victor is still trying to work it out on his end as to whether or not he can get his phone to accept the Google Hangout piece. In the meantime, so one of the things that happened this week, and has been happening over the last few weeks, that brought us to tonight's topic. Here in Massachusetts, we've been doing a lot of work, and we had Pata Suyumoto and Jen Kelleher on earlier in the year talking about our new Alliance for Equity here in Massachusetts. It started out as the People of Color caucuses and ally caucuses, and then it's grown already. And what's happened is that certainly here in Massachusetts, we've had 2 retreats with Dr. Karen Suyumoto, Pata's sister, who specializes in social justice and racial equity at University of Massachusetts, Boston. And we've been going through a complete overhaul, as any public health organization should be doing, to address the proper moving forward. It's in our strategic plan now. And so we're working as an executive committee for the Massachusetts Coalition for Suicide Prevention to really get better informed and better educated. And it has been an eye opener. And as it, timing in life is amazing. And over the last few weeks, a lot of, thankfully, finally, a lot of information has been put out there over the last couple of weeks, in particular, maybe the last 3 or 4 weeks, and about the fact that while we constantly talk about the numbers of suicide rising, and yet it's always in reference to um, white middle-aged men or adolescent girls and boys who are predominantly white, and we do not include other populations in that. And yet the numbers are very clear that when Victor starts to share, I mean, he's really been pounding this over on Twitter, and Judge Wren jumped in, and those two, if you don't follow those two and watch this conversation, you're really missing out on an education to be able to follow what's going on with this conversation, and it's really important. So suicide prevention, mental health, and communities of color. We have dropped the ball. I'm not sure we even ever picked it up, frankly. And so there's a lot that has to be done, and we all need to take responsibility for not doing a better job with this. And there was a hearing in Congress this week, and a young actress gave a very powerful and moving story, her own personal story, and what she has witnessed about students she was teaching before she became an actress. And I can't imagine anybody hearing that story and not being stunned, or motivated to do something important and something meaningful. So I'm going to be quiet, and I'm going to be watching the chat. And Judge Wren, I'm going to turn it over to you and Victor, because you have Victor in your hand.
I'm gonna, first of all, I just want to, can you hear it?
Yep, I can.
I can hear you.
Oh,
Okay,
yeah, I can hear
great.
him.
Wonderful. I really want to give just so much credit, first of all, to the work that Victor does. And I want to back up and take everybody, please, to Victor's local gym.
Yes.
Because on every Sunday morning, I don't know for how long, Vic, this has been going on, but I think over a year or more. Every Sunday morning, we just get these incredible inspired messages from Victor, largely dealing with suicide prevention and different aspects of suicide prevention. And of late, of course, because of a recent study that's come out through JAMA Psychiatry, Pediatric publication rather, the fact that there's been a confirmation, that an alarming trend has occurred among young African American boys and girls between the ages of 5 and 12 dying by suicide. And of course, the alarm bells have gone off, and Victor largely has really been talking about this and beating, that drum, that sense of urgency that we all really need to step up. So Victor, thank you so much for being such a great champion.
Well, thank you. I appreciate you bringing that up. Yeah, I started, it's been a couple of years ago now. I started out really just trying to encourage people to incorporate exercise into their wellness regimen, because I'm also a big advocate for reframing the conversation around mental wellness and not just always talking about mental illness.
Correct.
As well. And then, as you say, I started to see more and more information about the suicide rates increasing in communities of color. And it really resonated with me because of a couple of things. One, I work for a healthcare system, and
yes, tell everybody who you work for.
I work for Atrium Health.
Atrium Health, and where is that located?
We're headquartered in Charlotte, North Carolina. We span across 3 states in North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia. We're a large hospital system.
Great.
And being in a hospital system working for healthcare, one of the things that is primary for us is to avoid preventable death. And suicide is a preventable death. So it resonates with me for that reason. But then also, being an African American male, I remember growing up being told that it wasn't an issue for Black people, that we don't die by suicide. And it was always perceived as someone else's issue. And I'm convinced that part of the reason for the increase in suicide, particularly among our young people, is that we have not talked about it.
Yeah.
Because we've not talked about it, we've not had a sense of urgency about trying to prevent suicide.
Well said. Well said. And I was listening to you, Vic, and you were saying that suicide, death by suicide, is preventable. And I'm going to shift just for a moment, to our last Facebook Live that we did together with Dr. Bart Andrews. And, now, here we are in the criminal justice system, and we were talking about the very tragic fact, that suicide is the leading cause of death in U.S. jails, the third leading cause of death in U.S. prisons. And the idea of preventing incarceration, interrupting and disrupting the cycles of incarceration, particularly as a result of mental health and other behavioral health disorders, is something obviously, that is really my passion. And, through the mental health court, as I think many of our listeners may know, and I'm pretty sure that I've talked about this the last time I appeared with Anne Marie on this chat, is the fact that I think it was in 2016 that Broward's Mental Health Court, I declared the court a zero suicide initiative. And, you know, I really, really did that very, very intentionally. Not only, you know, do we know, Vic, that we've got an overrepresentation of people with mental illnesses getting arrested and in our criminal justice system, but, you know, sadly, we have an overrepresentation of minorities in our criminal justice system. And so we have, I think, not only a tremendous amount of work to do, but I think, let me know what you think. I think we've got a really wonderful opportunity if we all work together to really make a difference here. What do you think?
Yeah, I think you're totally right. And I think that we have to look at that from both ends. I think we have to look at what are the things that are sending people of color into the criminal justice system. Are the systemic things that we're dealing with, including some of the socioeconomic challenges that people living in communities of color face. Then we have to look at access to mental health care once people are incarcerated. But I also think one of the things we don't talk about is our reentry programs. And when people come out of jail and prisons, for example, for African-American males who have been to jail and prisons are twice as likely to show symptoms of PTSD as are African-American males who have not been to jail and prison. So I think that one of the things we have to focus on is what kind of reentry program do we have for people coming out of jail and prison, because they're at an even higher risk of suicide once they're released.
That's right. That's right.
And I think that we ought to be looking at programs that really deal with PTSD. If you think about someone who's living in a prison system where you are in a hypervigilant state all the time, you're going to have some after effects of that. And I think part of our reentry needs to be focused on how do we deal with their mental wellness when they're reentry back into the system.
It's so true, you know, and I think that just to take us back to the community for a moment, part of my preparation for tonight, and I'm going to try to hold it up because I actually have this in my hand. This is an actual copy of the executive summary of the Mental Health, Culture, Race, and Ethnicity Executive Summary. That was in my background folder that we received so many years ago when I was appointed to the President's New Freedom Commission on Mental Health, and I wanted to return to it to take a look not only of, you know, really what we were thinking, what the Surgeon General was thinking, Dr. Satcher, you know, back in 2001. That was 2 years after the mental health report was first issued in 1999. And, you know, I made some notes, and I just think the notes are really fascinating when we go back in time, you know, basically just saying what we know, you know, that no one, and you say this all the time, Vic, you know, no one is immune from mental health conditions. No one. It crosses over every ethnicity, every race, gender, age, etc. And yet we also understand that because of disparities, that regardless, that we know that disparities do exist, and that in fact disparities do impact people's ability to access care, and that not everybody gets the same share of care, so to speak. And I really think that is something that we really need to focus on, and that's one of the recommendations of the Mental Health, Culture, Race, and Ethnicity report, basically, is that we must develop a shared vision of equal access to effective mental health services and opportunities to collaborate. And here we are, aren't we really I think maybe it's taken 10 years, 15 years, 18 years, but here we are. And I don't know if you had a chance to watch that powerful congressional testimony by Taraji Henson this week to Congress. What were your impressions? I was overwhelmed.
Yeah, I think so much of what she said resonated with me as an African American, and I think I'm happy. I'm so happy to see someone with the stature of Taraji P. Henson talking about this. I think it's also sad though that we're in a place where we have to talk about this. It's obvious when you look at the socioeconomic challenges that kids of color face that we're automatically going to be at higher risk for mental health. And on top of that, you have the stigma that's attached to just talking about mental health, and even more so about suicide in communities of color. And that puts us at an even further disadvantage. You can't exclude from this conversation either looking at the historic disenfranchisement of people of color and the challenge people of color have had in accessing education and accessing healthcare, all those things that put us at a disadvantage. And then on top of that, we're not even very well represented when we look at the providers that are providing the care. So when you look at trying to find a provider in your community, first of all, you don't have providers located in the communities where many people of color live. And then around the country, only 2% of psychiatrists, 2% of psychologists, and 4% of social workers are Black. So it puts me at an even further disadvantage.
You hit on such important, salient points. And I thought, something for me, that was so poignant is, when she said, we just can't pray our way out of this. And that was really one of the themes, and I think I mentioned this to you, and is that I sit on the Board of Governors of the United Way of Broward County, and just as these alarm bells, were going on across the country with this new data about suicides impacting, really kindergartners and elementary school students. Well, it impacted, thankfully, the United Way of Broward County as well. And it went ahead and it produced a groundbreaking short documentary called Faded Conversations, which Anne Marie was kind enough to post the link for our viewers. The viewing time only runs 20 minutes, and it is going to be, I promise you, the judge promises you, 20 minutes of the most inspired, important time. I think that every single community policymaker, mental health administrator, case manager, if you are intersecting with mental health, working in any of our systems, it doesn't matter which one, everybody has to take a look at Faded Conversations. It's on YouTube. It doesn't cost a thing. But these men that just happen to answer an ad that Elkin Alfred of the United Way sent out to talk about mental health in the Black community, and these men came together in such authenticity, with such vulnerability. What made them, what was it in their life that made them make that tough decision? And it is a tough decision when something is so frowned upon, so taboo, to go ahead and seek care. These are the kind of conversations that I think, Vic, we all need to listen to and learn from. What do you think?
Yeah, I think one of the things to take away from that conversation, I think, and I agree, everyone needs to watch that. I was moved when I watched it, and I could relate so much to the things that the gentleman in the documentary were saying. But I think it helps to frame some of the complexities about being an African American male in America, and how we how we access care, how we have to carry ourselves as we navigate society. And I think the thing that the balancing act here is, I talk a lot in the African American community. I talk a lot with the faith-based community and the community, wherever I can find community centers, YMCAs. I have a lot of conversation with people in the African American community about accessing care, because African Americans, while African Americans report about 20% more psychological distress than white, we are also less likely to initiate care and more likely to prematurely end care. And so, on the one hand, we do have the stigma that we kind of impose in our community. And as T. Henson talked about, we are more likely to go to our churches and we think that we can pray it out. So there's that piece of it. But on the other hand, our healthcare community has done a very poor job of reaching into these communities of color and trying to make healthcare accessible. So one of the things I took away from these gentlemen talking was that men, African American men, we like to think that African American men don't want help, don't want to talk to people. African American men do want help. Everyone wants to be healthy. Everyone wants to be whole.
Yeah,
But
I found that too. Yep.
And we haven't done a good job of framing it in a way that's safe for communities of color.
I'm so glad that you brought that up. There was one article I was reading. We talk about, well, what kind of help? Are we talking about pastoral help? Are we talking about professional help? But I can tell you every single day in my courtroom, and Broward County now is basically a non-white majority. We are really a melting pot, of all kinds of communities of color and all across the world. And when I'm in court, and whether I have family members there, whether it's my regular division or my mental health court, and I think, again, it goes to relationship and how you are speaking to someone relationally. And if people believe that you care about them, if they believe you are talking from your heart, they are, I know that the men that I'm talking to every single day in court, they are so grateful, number one, to have these conversations. I talked to them about the ACE study. I talked to them about the exposure to trauma, and about, the fact of what happens, when we just don't get the opportunities when we need them the most to link with the care that we need the most. In other words, God forbid somebody has a cardiac condition. Of course, what's going to happen? We use that example over and over again because it really is clear. Of course, they connect with a healthcare system. Well, we really have to, I think, do some very basic education and behavioral health literacy that, again, not only is there no difference, but that culturally speaking, it really has to, we have to make the case that there's a time when professional help really is the type of help that people need. And I think our churches, also could play a really big role in this. I got invited, or I will be soon invited, to go and to speak at a local faith-based institution, and I can't wait. Because I know that, our clergy, feels the same pain and loss, if somebody is lost either due to suicide or due to overdose. And everybody needs this information and education. What do you think?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I actually am the son of an African American pastor. My father pastored the church. He actually retired from pastoring about 2 years ago and pastored for 48 years. So I grew up in the church, and I know that the African American church historically has been the gateway into the African American community. So if we're going to partner with the community, the church is absolutely essential. We got to include faith leaders as a part of the conversation, because part of the challenge for anyone coming into these communities, anyone who wants to go into the right healthcare, is that you cannot understand the community, you cannot understand what a healthy community looks like unless you're able to see it through the eyes of that community. And I'm a firm believer that these underserved communities are underserved for a reason. It's not because of anything that they have done wrong. They're underserved because our healthcare institutions have not been in those communities. And now, as we're trying to move into those communities under the umbrella of whole person care, we can't go in thinking that we have the answers to how to go and provide these services in these communities, because we haven't been there. So I think part of what we have to focus on is what's already in the community that's working. What do people identify with? What do people trust? And the church historically has been where we've gone for our moral support, where we were gone, where we went for socialization. It was where we went for social services. So the church is an integral part.
It is. It is. You know, I was talking, there's so many issues, and I know we don't have a whole lot of time, but I did want to bring up something. I made a promise, and I'm going to keep it. And I was talking to one of our Twitter colleagues, our friends, and out in California, Dr. Margaret Fine, who I just have the greatest respect for, and she just wanted to make sure that I made sure that I was also talking about, you know, individuals, you know, in the LGBTQ community, and how much we have to make sure that we are doing everything that we can, you know, to provide, I like to say in my court, a court of refuge, you know, a court of sanctuary. You know, my courtroom is a sanctuary that we need to make sure we can talk about the things that need to be talked about, that it's a culture of acceptance. It's a culture, you know, of absolute dignity. And, you know, everybody really needs to know that they are not alone, and that, as you say, you know, it's a sign of strength, you know, to reach out for help. We're very fortunate in my county. We've got some really wonderful mental health centers that are specialized and devoted to the LGBTQ community. And I'm you know, I'm so, anytime I can make a referral, you know, to any of these multicultural centers or to anything, I feel that, you know, I just feel so grateful that collaborations exist, and that, you know, the stronger I think we can make our collaborations and build them and grow them, that, you know, we could really move towards prevention, that we can get, you know, early identification, early screenings. And I just really hope that my community, you know, begins to develop a strategic plan, you know, to do that. Have you been, I know that you, you know, are talking to so many administrators across the country. What have you seen in trending in terms of what I'm calling, you know, true prevention?
You know, there are good and bad points to that. I think that the positive thing is that I hear more and more as I talk to folks around the country about the need to get upstream and to be able to deal with prevention and try to catch things before people go into crisis mode, because in many cases, by the time we reach crisis mode, we're too late, and a lot of the damage has been done. The unfortunate thing, though, is that we are a country that is in such a crisis mode when it comes to mental health. All of our focus, our attention, our resources are put into crisis, and in large part it's because we have not done the work of prevention to this point. So the challenge right now is, how do you deal with the crisis in front of you? but also address the prevention piece of it. So some of the things I think that people are doing, I think things like mental health first aid are cutting edge things that people are doing to really try to normalize the conversation for the average person about mental health. But mental health first aid is a big thing that people are doing. The other thing is that we know so much more now than we did 20 years ago about the impact of trauma on development, and particularly early childhood development. So a lot of the conversation around childhood trauma and the impact of trauma is what I'm seeing people start to talk more about. And in particular, how do we work with our school systems to help our school teachers and our school administrators recognize trauma? It is so easy for a child to be labeled as ADHD or conduct disorder, when in fact, conduct disorder and PTSD look a lot alike in a child. So a child may be going through a traumatic situation at home, but in the school system, because we don't know what we're looking at, oftentimes they're labeled with conduct disorder, ADHD, the public medication, and they're put on a track that's not conducive to good outcomes. So a lot of the trauma work, I think, is what I'm really pleased to see happening around the country.
You know, I'm so glad you mentioned that, and in terms of all of the issues, you know, not only in the schools, but I think also, of course, reflective in the juvenile justice system and in the court system. I mean, I really believe this. I may not always be the most popular for saying this, and yet we have no choice. You know, we've got to be able to take ownership of the things in our systems, in our cultures, that we have to correct. We did that to a large extent, or a good extent, in terms of mental health in our court system, but we really have to take ownership of implicit bias, of discrimination, of racial injustices, all, you know, and we must do that. It's a big issue. It's going to remain a big issue, and yet I don't hesitate to talk about it, because we have got to be able to realign all of our policy, all of our structures, all of the way our procedures that we are certainly in the court system, how we're responding, you know, to different phases, for example, of a case. And if we can become mindful and more conscious, you know, of what happens to, you know, African American and other minorities, children in the school system, or, you know, in terms of a misidentification of behavior, or being over punitive, or expulsions, and then we have, you know, all of a sudden we've got kids that can't learn or can't keep up, and then they drop out, and then before you know it, they're sitting, you know, in my court, which of course everyone I think knows is an adult criminal justice system. And we have got to be able to have the courage to look at the data, to look at the evidence, to understand, you know, where we've been. And I'm holding up this report again, the supplemental report to the mental health report of the Surgeon General, and to know where we must go.
Well, here's the unfortunate reality. Right now, African American kids represent roughly 17% of the population of youth in this country, but they represent about 40% of the kids, or 45% of the kids in foster care, and about 40% of the kids in the juvenile justice system.
Correct.
So that tells us that something we're doing is wrong. Now, we can say on the one hand that there may be some things that they're dealing with in their communities that are making them more likely to end up incarcerated in the juvenile justice system. But more than likely, when you have numbers that disproportionate, there's something there's some kind of cultural bias in the system that is making it more likely that those kids, those families end up split up, and those kids end up in the
yes, and almost 6 times as likely to be incarcerated in U.S. jails and prisons. So
when we look at, yeah, go ahead.
No, I just wanted to make sure that we're including jails and prisons, of course, in terms of disproportionality. And I just feel, you know, that when we're talking about criminal justice reform, or we're talking about reform across the entire nation, you know, we've got to be able to look, I think, to be objective about you know, the impact, the toxic impact of the stress of discrimination, the stress of implicit bias, and the impact and consequences of that.
Well, here's one thing I'd like to say, Judge, and this is something that you know, I don't know how this is going to land, but I do think that we have to address the fact as well that African American males continue to be disproportionately shot and killed by law enforcement officers. And if we don't recognize that that's a problem and there's something wrong with that, we're never going to correct it. And one of the things as an African American male, and you know, I think even listening to the gentleman on the Fated Conversation documentary, probably the most strong to the forefront in my mind is that if we don't begin to have some conversations about why it is that the African American male, just by virtue of being African American male, somehow perceived as more dangerous, if we don't begin to have that conversation and recognize that for what it is, we're going to continue to see these things. And when those kind of things happen, and I see that in the media, my children see that, my sons see that in the media, all of those things impact the mental health of African American males because it impacts the way that we feel that we are perceived in this country. And so I think when we start to talk about the justice system and we start to talk about stigma, we have to recognize that these things are happening and we're seeing them. And one of the things that frustrates me as an African American male is that I know there are African American male law enforcement officers who have to see this and recognize and realize that something is going wrong. And I just wish that some of them would be more vocal and talk about the fact that African American males get disproportionately shot and killed.
Well, you know, this, you know, I think first of all, you know, this is such a complicated social problem. I think very nuanced, extremely complex. And I was just thinking, though, when you were speaking, that, you know, there's so much more that binds us together. And if we, you know, in terms of suicide, just in the news, you know, there was, I think you even tweeted about it, that there was a number of deaths by suicide in the New York Police Department. And that here we have the police chief, you know, trying to, you know, talk about suicide just like we're talking about every other, you know, social problem. We're talking about excessive use of force on the one hand. We're talking about, you know, suicide, you know, the complications of community policing. And yet there's one common thread that I think sort of runs, you know, through all of these issues. And that is, you know, the idea of dignity, the idea of redemption, the idea of taking ownership of social problems and being courageous enough to have these conversations, not only speaking, but listening and validating. You know, these procedural justice principles that are really all about the mutuality of personhood, what we share, that we're one world, that, you know, we're all human beings and we all want the same things for our children. And, you know, I feel that we have so many bridges that we need to build. And yet here we are, you know, with an epidemic, you know, with a suicide epidemic that's impacting every race, you know, every social strata, no matter how wealthy one is, no matter how famous one may be, or what, you know, it's really, I think, in some very tragic way, a tie that binds. And, you know, maybe through this kind of discussions that we have common ground, that we, you know, we need to talk about the importance of everybody rising together, that we are in if we say, you know, one canoe. And you know, Vic, as a son of a pastor, I think you are so, empowered and learned to, to hold these conversations, in that type of light to build bridges.
Yeah, and I think that you make a very good point about there being common threads, because I think that's a conversation that can be had, but we can have the community, we can have justice system, we can have the healthcare system, because suicide is a community issue. It's not a hospital issue, it's not a court issue. It's a community issue, and we need all of the participants at the table, including folks in the communities of color, talking about the things that are impacting all of us and leading all of us, because in reality, white males are the most likely to die by suicide. So all of them being impacted. I do want to go back to one thing, though, Jen, because you mentioned earlier about LGBTQ, particularly LGBTQ youth that die by suicide. And I did want to say about that, statistically, we know that LGBTQ youth are up to 3 times or more likely to die by suicide or to attempt suicide than youth identified straight youth. And I think as an African American, the way I look at that is, and I know that in African American communities, all communities of color, there's still also a lot of stigma around being LGBTQ. Yeah. And I think that we have to recognize too that people are at different places in evolving to the point of being able to be more accepting of the LGBTQ community. So
absolutely.
Absolutely. I think for those of us who are, I'm one as a heterosexual African American male, happily married. I will go out and march in the Pride Parade every year, and I think it's incumbent upon those of us who have evolved to the point of really understanding that everybody wants their basic human rights. Everyone wants to be happy. Everyone wants to be healthy. Everyone wants to be loved. I think it's incumbent upon us to be vocal for those who have not evolved to that point yet, because we don't want to lose anyone. And as an African American male, I know what it feels like to feel that you've been discriminated against. I know what it feels like to feel that other people are uncomfortable just because you're in the room and you feel like you have to make them more comfortable. So it just boggles my mind as an African American how we as African American people can discriminate against anybody LGBTQ or otherwise. So I would say to any people of color out there listening in particular, open your arms, open your heart, embrace the LGBTQ community. I can promise you it is not contagious. They just want to be loved and treated fairly like everyone else. And if anyone's rights are being infringed upon, I'm going to be the first one to speak up for them.
No, well said, well said. And before we go, and I'm sure that Anne Marie's gonna come back on in just a little bit. I think that the idea of raising this issue to our policymakers, that we really have to prioritize, and really with a sense of urgency, that we must have culturally relevant, culturally sensitive, culturally appropriate, whatever jargon anybody is comfortable with. We have got to have, multicultural mental health and behavioral health centers. I was so thrilled yesterday, or not yesterday, excuse me, but this week, taking a plea in my regular division, and I found out that the individual was really suffering from the loss of a family member who was in another country, and his spouse did not come over, and I really felt very strongly that this might have been a driver to what was happening, and I wanted to connect him to a multicultural behavioral health center. And I finally, in my community, we have opened a true multicultural behavioral health center. I cannot wait to take a tour. They speak 7 languages. I just cannot wait to see what that means in terms of the provision of care, what that means in terms of the welcoming, what that means in terms of really elevating culture beyond, I think, what I may have ever actually witnessed before throughout my entire career. So in all my different sectors. So I just wanted to say we've got to prioritize these services. We've got to prioritize developing workforce that our friend Dr. Howard Liu does so well where he's at in terms of North Dakota. And, you know, I feel that, you know, to build out this workforce, to let people know that we are desperately in need, you know, of psychiatrists, psychologists, and, you know, and psychiatric nurses, you name it. We really need to be on the ground because, you know, everybody seems that I see that they really need connection. They need connection to mental health services, that we live in a time where we're all just living by our telephone and we're not really connecting to one another. And there's pain in that.
There is. But there's also an opportunity, I think, we are, particularly when we're talking about social determinants, and social determinants at the core really is trying to get to those things that impact people where they live, where they are, the impact their
exactly. Give them the potential to succeed. Yes.
And technology actually gives us some new avenues to doing that. And
it does.
You know, I think that we're past the point of the answer being going in always with bricks and mortar and building new facilities. We need to figure out now, when we talk about integration, we integrate behavioral health into primary care, we integrate primary care into behavioral health. How do we integrate behavioral health into the church?
Yes.
To get people the technology to get on a computer or a cell phone to Skype with their therapist or their clinician in the safety of their church or their community center or their YMCA. I think that's where we need to be focusing now, is how do we integrate those services into the community where people live.
Absolutely. Well, if we could put courts in communities, we could put behavioral health in churches. You know, I think that, you know, these fabulous collaborations and innovations are very exciting. And I think we can certainly make the case that the time has come that we need to cross that chasm of faith, if you will, in terms of health. Because I think that, as you said, health is not necessarily in healthcare systems. It's where we live. It's the quality of the workplace. It's the quality of education, and it's the pathway to our own potential, so that we could all thrive and really move out of really this despair that our friends at Wellbeing Trust talk about in their Pain of the Nation report so beautifully. That we really all need to lift each other up together. And so this was great.
I just, one last thing here. I see a tweet that came in from my friend Dr. Wisdom Powell. She's such a brilliant lady. She tweeted, many African American men and boys are raised to be strong, stoic, and silent. This can be an important survival tactic, but its utility for thriving is limited. Our boys and men need a different set of social rules. One that gives them permission to express vulnerability.
That's right. That's Faded Conversations.
Okay.
Yes, that is the message. Tune in to Faded Conversations. It is the best 20 minutes you will ever spend. Please, please.
Hey, you two.
Wait. Anne Marie's talking. I have to put my headphones on. Wait. Hello.
Hello. Well, I have to tell you that, wow, this has been quite a conversation.
We covered a lot of ground.
You covered a lot of ground, and I hear it. It's interesting because I see so many parallels. I see so many parallels, not only what you've been talking about, Judge Wren, but Victor. I find this whole thing fascinating. The commonality because I represent, I hope I represent well, impacted family members. And if I had my eyes closed, and just listened, it is the exact same barriers that we've run into of trying to encourage people who have been emotionally impacted by some kind of suicidal experience with a loved one. And this goes across communities.
Yes.
Absolutely across communities. I as I mentioned to Judge Wren earlier, that a couple of weeks ago, Victor, I was at the 10th annual Asian American Mental Health Forum in Boston, well, just north of Boston. And it was an experience. It was an educational experience. I'm totally open and honest. It was an uncomfortable experience to listen to the pain of being marginalized because they are Asian American within the communities. And yet I recognize that same marginalization of myself within the field of suicidology, of trying to discuss a population that is in the millions and is still dismissed and marginalized, and that is the impacted family members. So we have such a universal issue, and I just wish. I'm a big fan of blowing up silos. I'm going to get into trouble one of these days saying that, but I cannot express my gratitude for both of you. You have stood out on social media. You have, Victor, day in and day out, you both of you address the very difficult topics. And I don't see that happening a whole lot. So I need to applaud you both for being such influences, such change agents, such champions, because we have these voices that have been silenced, as by your own description, being raised to be silent about this. I did a documentary a few years ago, and here I am, 35 years in public health. I'm doing this documentary under the blanket of the Massachusetts Department of Public Health, in the sense that they knew I was doing this within our coalition work. And I looked around the room and I said, okay, I have a problem right here. Everyone I've interviewed to this date is white. And so I reached out to someone I consider a deep friend, and I said, I don't want to insult you, but I need you to come to this table and talk to me. And Victor, April said very much the same things that you talked about. She was raised, and her whole community was raised, that you were in church whether you wanted to be or not, and that you would pray it away. And she also brought up, again, what we've talked about, that the young men that she grew up with would never talk about mental health or suicide, but they would get themselves involved with violence, with drugs, any other way to have a painfully slow death. And it really is. It's just so frustrating that that shame on us that we can't do better. So we are at the point of final thoughts. I would like the two of you. We've got about 6 minutes left. So first I'm going to thank you, and then I'm going to turn it back to the two of you. In 3 minutes each or so, what are the most important crisp takeaways that you would like for this conversation, knowing that this has been recorded? It will be available all over social media by tomorrow. But what are the takeaways? I've heard a lot. I have a lot to process from listening to the two of you. I'm going to have to watch this over and over because it is so filled with important information. But for the two of you, I'm going to turn it back over and tell us what we need to do. And what are the most important takeaways? You're on.
Do you want to go ahead and start?
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear anything.
You couldn't hear anything? What just happened? So you're on speaker. No, so what are your takeaways, Anne Marie? We talked about a lot of things, but in 2-3 minutes, what are your takeaways that you want to leave the audience with?
I think a couple of things. One is that there are always nuances to mental health, and to suicidality, and I think one of the nuances is that you have to factor in the cultural challenges that people face, and for people of color, particularly men of color, there are challenges that we face just as African American men, Latino men, whatever the case may be. I think the other thing that I want to impress upon the hearts and minds of everyone out there listening is just to never forget that suicide is not a sign of weakness. It's not a sign of moral weakness. It's not a sign of spiritual weakness. Suicide is a sign of pain.
Yes, yes. That's beautiful. It's beautiful, and it's so true. And I just want to leave very, very succinctly. Please, everybody, I'm not making this up. I'm not saying this because I'm associated with the United Way of Broward County. Please watch and share Fated Conversations. You have the link. You will never be the same. You will never be the same. That's how I felt. I also feel that all of us, together, I say this, I mean it, I've seen it and I've lived it, that together we can make change. And just by the people that we work with, the people that are friends, just by saying, hey, treatment's really important, and getting connected to care can be so, so helpful. Just keep talking about it. And my gratitude, I think, is always to those, those survivors, survivors of suicide, survivors of mental health, and consumers that always had the courage to speak out and tell their story. Because by telling stories, it gives us permission to share their stories. And I just think that is just so, so powerful. And so I just want to thank you again, Anne Marie, for having us.
Oh,
and,
you're more than welcome.
For all the work that you do.
Oh, you're more than welcome.
Yes, thanks, Anne Marie.
Oh, thank you. And Victor will.
If I can say one last thing.
Oh, wait.
Yeah,
go ahead.
All men of color out there, there is no shame, there's no weakness in talking. If you need help, get help.
If you need help, get help.
Exactly.
Exactly. You're not alone.
And please tune in on Twitter to Easy Like Sunday Mornings, because they are absolutely wonderful pieces of wisdom that Victor puts out every week. Absolutely worth it. I do think you should have the Commodores in the background, though, when you're doing that. I don't know if he could hear that, but you can share it with him. Yeah, because that's the first thing. As soon as I saw it, that was the first thought that crossed my mind.
Right.
I want to thank you both. These are the kind of conversations we need to continue to have. I'm a firm believer that, and I'm old enough now that I've seen change happen. It happens too slowly. I really do feel it happens too slowly, that sometimes we need to give it not just a gentle nudge, we need to give it a shove. And before there is more tragedy, because it's there. It's just so we can't wait. We can't wait. That's one more life
lost.
We can't
wait. Anne Marie's saying we can't wait.
We have to move. We have to push this forward, and that may mean bruising a few feelings, but we've got to do it. And those of us who are willing to do the help, we have to be willing to listen on how we can do it. And,
absolutely.
And I think it will work.
Absolutely. Well said. Well said. Well, we'll sign off and thank you again. We'll see you on Twitter.
All right. We'll see you on Twitter. Victor,
all right,
thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Vic.